Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here sharing all these experiences with all of you who I think everyone who is here and who is connected is very passionate about travel. So I think that's something that brings us together. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I put together a presentation so I can share with you some pictures and some of the look and feel of the work that we're doing in Colombia. So let's get started. All right, so the name of my talk today is making tourism differently to build peace. So in Colombia, as some of you might know the context, Colombia has been going through a lot in the last 4 or 5 decades, and the peace is the main thing in Colombia, at least for me and for a lot of other million Colombians. So what I want to talk to you about is the intersection between tourism and peace, and to bring you my testimony of how I have seen it work out. Colombia, such a big and complex and ambiguous word, right? I'm sure that if I ask you, what do you feel when I say Colombia? A lot of ambiguous things will come. Maybe some images of beautiful forests and ecosystems, but at the same time, like large cities with millions of people. Or maybe very sad and dramatic stories about narcos, but at the same time, very happy and resilient people. Or maybe um, I don't know, like these ambiguous things that maybe some fear, but at the same time excitement. So Colombia is that. Colombia is so full of ambiguities, and it's really the country of paradox. And I came here to share with you what my journey has been as a social entrepreneur, navigating this country and working in the best part of travel, which is tourism activities. And more than that is a testimony of how I've seen with my own eyes tourism being an important part of the massive transformation that my country has been through during the last years. So go back some years ago when I was a kid, these kind of images were sadly something very common, and this kind of violence was very normalized. I remember watching the news, seeing images like this, and I grew up watching this, so I never realized that that I was growing up in a country in war. So all these images, and for example, this as an anecdote, when I was a kid, when I was a teacher in preschool, it was pretty common to see the teachers putting duct tape on the windows in case there was a blast of a terrorist attack. The year I was born in the '89, there were 93 bomb attacks between the drug war between the cartels and the police. 93 in a single year, the year I was born. So this was a very common scene. And also this idea of, I grew up in a big city. I grew up in Bogota, although this is a picture of Medellin, but that was the idea. Like the main cities surrounded and the territory around us was a no-go, impossible to go out of the main cities, and there was a lot of fear to really go out there and explore the nature. Thankfully, I had a fearless dad. For a lot of his friends, he was an irresponsible dad because he used to, in the times of the worst violence, where Colombia was very rough, he would take my brother and I and some friends of us to go on hikes and to go out to the nature. And these kind of moments really started to nurture me and to tell me that through travel, I could understand that the narrative that was being told around me was partially true. And the people that I was fearing the most, people in the countryside and these unknown, was actually very human, and they were very warm as well. So traveling through Colombia started my own healing process, and that's a process that has not been ended yet, and I don't think that it will end. But it was incredible for me how, as a traveler, I started to see the impact of travel in myself first, before taking this impact of travel to other people. So it was very natural for me, although I didn't study tourism or anything related to tourism. I started working as a tour guide. It was very natural because travel was always a big passion. Then building a company, operating tourism activities in my hometown, Bogota. And then gradually we started to engage into the travel industry, different industries like the creative industry, on the scientific society. So we started to bring in together travel and things that were not traditionally paired with travel. So that we started to evolve until it was 2016. I was 27 years old. I was 5 years in travel by that time. And that was when the peace agreement was about to be signed. So I don't know if some of you might be familiar with this story, but back in 2016, after 4 years of the negotiation with the main military group, a guerrilla group, and the government, they were negotiating for 4 years. And then it was passed on a referendum for the Colombian society to pass the peace agreement or not. And I said before, Colombia, the country of paradox. So yes, we have a great example of that. The peace agreement didn't go through. What's hard is that people who were mostly affected by violence, which is people in the countryside, those were in favor of the peace agreement. And people in the cities, based on fear and based off the idea of making concessions to war criminals, were against it. So the peace agreement didn't go through, and it ended up going through Congress, and it was like a whole political thing. I have a documentary to recommend you if you want to go deeper into that. But at the end of the day, what happened then is that I sat with my team. I remember the night of the polls, sitting with my team and thinking, what is wrong? What's wrong with democracy? I mean, we have seen in the rest of the country how people that are directly affected by violence, they want to pass the peace agreement and move on as a society. But the society that has been enclosed in the cities is very fearful of the rest of the country. So we started to wonder, what can we do as entrepreneurs in the travel industry to support this? What is our role here? So by this beautiful coincidence of life, in that moment, I met this guy. This guy is Jaime, and he's a former gangster, and he used to be the leader of a gang in Bogota, my hometown. Actually, his gang was very near a territory where I grew up. And I met him when he was out of jail, and he was very decisive to not go back to criminal patterns and to not pass that to the next generation. And he started to build a tour in his neighborhood. So I met him very early on. We started working together, and we used that skill of bringing the non-traditional parts of tourism to the tourism mainstream. We used all that to bring content and to make these tours attractive. And a couple of years working together, we started to see that Breaking Borders, which is the name of this tour, had a constant stream of travelers, and that changed the reality of a whole neighborhood. And the murder rate dropped from around 90 a year to 0 after tourism ramped up. So, well, that's when I realized something that was very, very powerful that I discovered. And in the own words of Jaime, peace is not signed, it's built. And it's built from the ground up. It's built from the communities up, and it's built when the peace is needed the most. So that's when I realized that there's in Colombia hundreds of different leaders that have these projects that are amazing and that are building peace from the ground up in many different ways, throughout tourism, throughout capoeira, throughout music, throughout gastronomy, coffee, dance. And it's amazing to see how they're changing the reality of their communities. And I'm gonna bring you a couple of examples. This one is in Medellin. It's called Sombata. It's an Afro-Colombian collective of hip hop artists who are using music to keep youth out of violence in this area, which was Pablo Escobar's stronghold years back. And this is another great example. These are FARC ex-combatants, and after peace agreement, they decided to start a whitewater rafting operator so they could connect to the formal economy, and they were not depending on war-based economies, but they started to work in tourism, and they have been very successful. However, these are 3 successful cases out of hundreds of community-driven initiatives. And the problem here is that 97% of community-based initiatives fail. And for the work that we have been doing with Impulse with communities, we can narrow down to these 3 main reasons for them to fail. Number 1 is that they fail to be financially sustainable. Number 2 is that they fail to generate value in the market. And number 3, they fail to connect with partners. So we at Impulse, we set off to build a solution for this failure. And what we do is to create vehicles that allow meaningful integration between communities and tourism value chains. So we build partnerships. So we use a capitalistic language to bring these products into the economy and to be partners and to connect with them and not to depend on charity or anything like that. So it's the idea of making these initiatives to thrive and become thriving social enterprises. And the way we do this is with heart, with all our heart. So heart is a framework for product development. Product is an experience or a service or a tour. And the whole idea behind heart is to have these 5 components. Number 1, to be human-centered, to understand that what we're doing is ultimately a connection within humans. Number 2 is to bring economic opportunities. So every tour that we run, we make sure that the economic engines of these communities are plugged into the tourism value chain, and that it's a fair trade, and that it's well paid. In many times we're competing with narco traffic, so it has to be well paid and it has to be worthwhile for them. Number 3, is the idea of authenticity. We will never ask them to do something that is not being done traditionally, or to dress up in a specific way for the tourist, or to make a stage. Everything is not a stage, everything is a circle, everything is about the interaction and about the authenticity. Regenerative narrative, that's a play on word that we have, and it's a regeneration of a narrative. So we have realized how in tourism, when we tell our story differently and we can reimagine our future and to resignify our past, we know that that's the psychological basis for social transformation. And last but not least, top notch. We make sure that things are on time, sanitized, great service, and that there's English well enough so that tourists can enjoy and travelers can interact well. So what we do is basically we start making them attractive with the right content, pictures, the storytelling to make these tours attractive to the audience. Then we work with our tour guides that break the language barrier. I was actually a tour guide at some point in my life, and to bring consistency to the experiences. So the tour guides are always working with communities to make them consistent and to break language barriers. And finally, we leverage on a widely diversified distribution network with domestic and international partners to bring these products in front of the eyes of travelers. And this way, we're using the power of tourism to help communities get back on their feet, one tour at a time. So if there's anyone here who's wondering about our business model, here it is. It's no secret about that. We have a ticket of around $91 per tour. On average, we have 1.6 customers, tours per customer, and each of the groups has around 4 travelers at a time. So what's interesting, and if you look at the mirror, at the image right here, is that the impact is at the bottom line of our financial structure. So for the ticket, we roughly break it down into 3. So 1/3 is for impulse, 1/3 is for the operations, which is the guide, transportation, food, and everything that's needed, and the other 1/3 is for the community-based initiatives. So that's a breakdown on how we do this, and we make sure that if we scale, the community-based enterprises are scaling as well. So to kind of change the focus and to go from the specific to the general, I want to talk to you about the theory of change. For those of you who work in the social sector, know what a theory of change, but in few words, a theory of change is how we want to operate and what's our strategy for that the small work that we do really moves the wheels of a larger ecosystem. So this is the idea here, and just follow me for a second. So what we do is basically to generate more tourism demand. Everything starts here, to capture this demand in any way we can. With more demand, we can sell more tours. With more tours, we can bring more opportunities in tourism, and that causes more thriving communities and more and stronger local community projects. And with thriving communities, there's more NGO and government involvement. There's peaceful and safer destinations, and that together creates more tourism demand. So what we do is basically spinning that wheel, and that we know that it's a virtuous cycle in the work that we do. So that's the impact strategy behind Impulse. With this work, we have been able to cater tours for more than 25,000 international travelers coming to Colombia. And we have been able to engage in the tourism travel sector, 15 community-based initiatives all throughout Colombia. And that together is impacting the lives of 70,000 people. Our goal for 2025 is to reach 40 different communities and impact half million people in Colombia. And that's really needed because Colombia is at a crucial moment in its history. And for opportunities like these, we're able to add more energy, more partners, more travelers. And the final message that I want to bring here to the conversation is that I have witnessed how tourism made with intention and heart can achieve a higher purpose.